This is a note that is to be added, or this is some speculation, not speculation, but this is some ideas that I'm coming up with to add to the diatribe that I'm forming on, the kind of the moral corruption of the country that is due to racialist legislation and this new racialist culture, which even the president, is in the grips of spewing and propagating and such. So is the Chief Justice as well. It's pretty disgusting. Okay, so and you can look at also the president's latest statement, but I've already written points on this, so I'm not going to add it to this note. So what I'm thinking of now is in further explanation in further illustration of the notes that I've already constructed, we can understand that the reason why that racialist policy sabotages the economy as a good sort of overarching metaphor for what it in fact is its racialist central planning. So we've got these mandates that are effectively racialist central planning that has worked so badly in terms of SEOs, in terms of the bad management of SEOs. Now Cyril Ramaphosa is expecting that the private sector is being racist and being unsensitive and being insensitive for not getting on board with turning themselves into the model of failure and devastation, which is typified by SEOs. I mean, effectively, when you're driven and run on this kind of legislation, you can't help but effectively, the only saving grace is that you sort of end up having to centralize everything. This is the general tendency of this policy. This is where it ends up. I need to make a very large voice note where I basically read out the things that I've written out, because they quite elaborately go into various different arguments and various different analysis of the things at work, the thing that is rotten in the state of Denmark. So to speak. And let me just think, what was the last thing I was saying? So I was talking about almost the ludicrous hypocrisy and rhetorical backflips that Cyril Ramaphosa was doing when he actually said some very nice things about non-racialism, and and then he fucked it all up, and then he said all this other nonsense, essentially to try and back up the Equality Act, and it's the patent hypocrisy and just the unreasonable, it's literally, it's unfathomable to imagine how it's a non sequitur. His non sequitur defense of the Equality Act after sort of saying some nice puffy, it's window dressing. It's fucking window dressing. And it is disgusting. But this is the age of newspeak, I guess. This is what we get, and we get a Chief Justice who talks about transformation. In the kind of way as if, this is, if we all just get on this train of thinking of this ideological racial consciousness, how the fuck do you endorse racial consciousness when your constitution has as its primary values, one of its primary values and cornerstones, non-racialism? The state completely abrogates its role to actually tackle disadvantage by forcing the private sector, private entities to do the role of what the state is. So the state ends up with absolutely no accountability as it shirks its responsibilities and passes them off. That's a point that I actually make much more forcefully in my text, which I don't have in front of me. So I'll just set that adrift. But I mean, it's so disgusting. What I was going to say is that transformation has been turned from a process into a noun, into this sort of this ever-present. It's already happened. You just have to believe as they believe, and do according to that ideology, and do according to your collective guilt, apportioned to your categorization. Here's a clue. The legislation is so fucked up that it would actually work better if everyone's identity numbers included their racial classification, which was scrapped after apartheid. Everyone's ID numbers were changed to remove that element from people's identification, and now effectively to actually facilitate the kind of legislation that the ANC functions on the basis of. It would be so much easier to bring that back, Okay, no, but let me go back to this transformation thing. It's progressive transformation is what we need, not the transformation. The transformation that is not happening, that is failing, that is going backwards because of this idiotic policy, which is also unconstitutional, which the Chief Justice still endorses and still propagates. And in fact, they can't even label hate speech because it forms the formula of this form of racialist politics and racialist consciousness. So when people actually use hate speech, like the white monopoly capitalist dog, which Gordon was insulted with, that can't be regarded as hate speech. According to the legislation that we have. That's how fucking sick the legislation is, because it's got this racialist consciousness embedded into it. And in the text that I have this all written out in, it's much more clear, that shows essentially how it is the proto-fascist ideology, and how it's how just devastating it is, and how it sabotages actual progressive transformation and development. We would have had much more people in better positions. We would have had a much more reflective, profile of a lot of things if we didn't have these mandates by government, which create a lot of perverse incentives and a lot of obstacles. Because why would you? There are some categories which it can, you have to understand reality. How old are the top management of big companies? They're old people. You can't expect in one generation for that to be representative of the population. It's ludicrous. You have to, kind of stratify that by age and sort of understand reality to some extent. And so to a lot of extent, these kinds of statistics are effectively used as just blanket racialist propaganda. But in a lot of things, there would be much better representation if we didn't have these ideological obstacles that poison the labor market. Because if you hire a black professional, you have to essentially pay them a premium wage to retain them, because they're going to get headhunted, because everyone is trying to increase their point score according to this disgusting legislation. So you've got a destabilized labor market, which is completely inauthentic. It's artificially driven by this ideological necessity. And so unless everything is driven foremost by this ideological necessity and this ideological filter of reality, it doesn't work. And leadership and management especially is something in which qualification and trust, trust is a huge thing, and this impediment effectively hollows out trust. How can you trust people when you're not even dealing with them on the same level that you're dealing with other applicants? It's creating a freak show which can only generate this toxic racial consciousness to compensate and justify the mismanagement effectively, because it's mismanagement from either way you look at it. And this, let's say, culture of mismanagement, because it's ideologically sanctioned by this racialist sensitivity, is I guess the euphemism, the idea that, oh, you only wouldn't go along with this because you are bigoted, reducing all the issues and the challenges into just bigotry. Oh yeah, it's bigotry because the reason why they're not a good candidate is because of the past. And so if you don't pretend that they are a different kind of candidate to the candidate that they actually are, then that counts as bigotry. I mean, what kind of fucked up bullshit is this? And that completely actually obscures the role that government is supposed to play, because government is supposed to tackle that gap. Government is supposed to invent and design something to address that. That is what the government is empowered to do in terms of directly tackling disadvantage, instead of this indirect passing the buck to the private sector so that it can just shit all over the private sector and blame it and scapegoat it, as they scapegoat the racialists' enemy, as they continue to repeat the historical narrative that supports this, sabotaged economy and distorted labor market, which is, one of the reasons why we're a failing state, effectively, and why we don't have growth and opportunity. If we actually instead just had a growing economy, because in growth, you actually get class mobility, and you imagine that if you didn't mandate that people hire people and have quotas, that they wouldn't. Well, I bet that they actually fucking would. I bet that they would actually make compensations for people's lack of skills and things like that. But they would do it based on their personal discretion. They would do it based on their own assessment. But that discretion and freedom of association is completely ripped out of their minds and is supposed to be replaced by this racialist consciousness of so-called sensitivity, which is effectively breeding a whole new that is the fascist conception of society. You break it all down by fucking identity, and everyone is comparing how each identity is doing. Never mind, like, specifically what's happening on the ground to specific applicants in specific issues. No. It's, as long as the statistic is met, you can do whatever the fuck you want. What kind of obtuse, thumb-sucked, it's a travesty. And it does run counter to the rule of law. It does also obviously run counter to non-racialism. It's also, and that it is parroted and repeated while someone pretends to defend non-racialism. It is fucking disgusting. Yeah. But, the culture effectively has already been attuned to this. So, Cyril Ramaphosa, half of the article that I read in terms of what he was saying was actually very good. But then as soon as he started defending the Equality Act, it was just, talk about non sequitur hypocritical bullshit. It doesn't make sense. It can't work. It's not consistent philosophically. And then what else can be said? So, yeah, and in fact, it's interesting because they actually changed the title of the document. Of the article. This was published by The Citizen. It was called something like I can't remember, but the original title was very inflammatory. It was like any white candidates. No. It was actually quite a race baiting article name. It said any white man can get a job if they are ethical and it said something. all the requirements that Ramaphosa put as what his standard of non-racialism hiring, kind of the qualities he was looking for to make the hire, and then in the name of the article it said, so it was those qualities, and it said something about others. So it meant white people get treated like this, and then other people are considered afterwards, or something like that. It had a very derisive tone to it, and then they changed it to a fairly neutral one after he complained. Well, that's what it said in the article that I read. I read the online version. Anyway, what else? So the culture itself, if you break this dogma, if you go against the grain of this orthodoxy, everyone will shit on you. Everyone will unsheathe their daggers and their knives. And you have to be able to fucking tolerate it. You have to be able to stand up to these people and call them out, and just keep on calling them out. And there's a lot of fucking calling out to do. Cyril Ramaphosa, he actually said some things, that a lot of these people are talking about chauvinism, but this is a natural fucking consequence of your stupid fucking legislation, which I understand he wasn't in power when it was promulgated, but he's fucking defending it. And I understand that he is somewhat bound to defend it, but, I hope he's fucking aware of the hypocrisy and the rhetorical backflipping in his reported quotes. Which I did read, and they were quotation marks, so I can just say that there is a huge incoherence in that message. And I guess the fascist the fascist view or conception of reality, which has already taken hold of our culture now, is I think they can almost smell the blood in the water when everything isn't just on their side, when everything isn't progressing according to their hymn book. And so Ramaphosa is trying to have it both ways, and I would say he's more so, I guess, putting lipstick on a pig. And I still don't know what his real fucking intentions are. But anyway, so I'm going to make a recording that's going to go solely on about the Chief Justice and sort of some sort of minutiae, and perhaps it'll inspire some people to use some arguments.